Frank Vogel is one of the most disrespected championship coaches in NBA history. Why? Because he dared to build his teams around a tactic so powerful that in today's league it's considered rare. And as a reward for that success, he was fired. But before this, against all odds, he almost stopped a dynasty with far less talent, and then outcoached the entire NBA to deliver the Los Angeles Lakers their first championship in a decade. So how did he pull this all off, and why did he become a scapegoat? The answer lies in a coaching strategy so effective at building dominant teams, players and front offices convinced themselves the coach didn't matter. To understand why someone as great as Frank and other coaches like him keep getting fired for being too good at their jobs, we have to go back to 1997, where Vogel's path to becoming a defensive mastermind began in the video room, not as a player. After earning his degree in biology while playing a little bit at the University of Kentucky, he began working with the Boston Celtics from 1997 to 2004. Vogel wasn't just watching game film though, he was practically living in the room. 15-hour days? That's on a day off. It was around the clock. This obsessive attention to detail will become the foundation for his career, as he religiously studied other teams' tactics, strategies, and developed an incredible knowledge of the game. These origin stories for coaches show how hard and how long it takes for them to make it into the NBA, but also shows how easily it can be taken away. How would Vogel's fast rise to the top impact the very nature of the NBA? Could he even threaten to prevent dynasties like the Miami Heat? What made Frank's video coordinator role so valuable was that it taught him to see basketball differently. While many coaches develop their philosophy through playing careers and who coaches them, much like say Steve Kerr, Vogel built his basketball mind by analyzing thousands of hours of film. He could spot the tiniest defensive breakdowns, recognize offensive patterns, and identify exploitable weaknesses in ways that many former players and even coaches simply could not. When Boston Celtics assistant coach Jim O'Brien became the head coach in 2001, he recognized this potential in Vogel. He decided to take Frank under his wing, giving him an increased responsibility in game planning and scouting as an assistant coach. Jim would later bring Frank along to Indiana, where O'Brien became the head coach in 2007. This mentorship proved crucial as Vogel absorbed strategic concepts while developing his own defensive principles. In between these Celtics and Pacers jobs, he had taken assistant coaching roles with the 76ers, become a scout for the Lakers and Wizards, and no matter where he was, he brought this analytical approach with him, always breaking down the game to its fundamental components, but mostly understanding what role players should have on defense. And this is how it would all come together for him, and quickly. The pivotal moment in Vogel's career came in 2011, when the Indiana Pacers fired Jim O'Brien mid-season. And despite having no head coaching experience, Vogel was named interim head coach by Larry Bird nonetheless. The basketball world largely expected him to be really a temporary placeholder. No one had truly heard of him. But Vogel had other ideas. In his first team meeting, he boldly declared, "I fully expect us to make the playoffs this year." That's a big deal because there were currently 17 wins and 27 losses, but the confident and positive approach immediately connected with his players. And what followed is, as you'd expect from a GOAT authority video, they went on a 7-0 run, and he stated that winning is simply a great medicine. They would go the rest of the season with 20 wins and 18 losses and managed to secure a playoff berth, the first in many, many years for the Indiana Pacers. His ability to instill confidence in a struggling team proved he wasn't just a tactical coach, which is what the Warrior was at this stage. He understood the psychological aspects of leadership. He understood it was difficult, but he understood why. It's not an easy thing to do, but the relationships that you build as an assistant coach really helped with that initial period and strengthened what we were trying to do when I talked about what we needed to tinker with to get us on track as a team. Because they made it to the playoffs and only got knocked out by the first-seeded Chicago Bulls led by league MVP Derrick Rose, the interim tag was removed by Larry Bird after the season, and Vogel could begin building what would become one of the NBA's most formidable defensive teams. In fact, the transformation of the Pacers under Vogel was so incredible, it deserves to not be forgotten. From 12th in defensive rating in 2011 to 9th in his first full season in 2012, and by the end of the 2012-2013 season, they had become the league's best defensive team. But what tactics did a coach who really came from nowhere in terms of championship pedigree, or even as a player, use to create such a dominating force, and how would he adapt this as the NBA's offenses would change completely over the next couple of years? Well, Vogel's defensive system was built around a few core principles. First and foremost was rim protection. He recognized that his center Roy Hibbert, despite limitations in other areas, could be an elite defender near the basket. Rather than trying to make Hibbert something he wasn't, Vogel designed a system where Hibbert stayed close to the rim, stopped defenders and drivers, and altered shots. This has to be noted as a factor in championship coaches' histories, and already questions why they are blamed and fired when there is evidence in their career before their championships that they were able to match a player's talents to the plays of the team, much like what Rudy T said before he won back-to-back titles with the Rockets. And it is worth noting that after he left Indiana, Hibbert was out of the league within 4 years at the age of 30. And this is more funny because Roy Hibbert even openly stated he wanted to play for a coach that had playing experience. We can just chuckle and move on from that because while his rim protection was incredible, it was complemented by Frank's emphasis on limiting three-point opportunities, particularly from the corners. And yes, I know that sounds like black magic compared to the NBA in 2025, but this was the foundation of the modern NBA and he was succeeding against it. During the 2012-2013 season, the Pacers allowed just 4.4 corner three attempts per game. This was the second lowest mark in the league. And you know who was optimizing for corner threes and had been for 10 years? Greg Popovich of the Spurs, and also the super team of the Miami Heat. By protecting both the rim and the three-point line, Vogel forced opponents into taking the least efficient shots in basketball, mid-range jumpers. Now, a lot of us with nostalgia do miss that game, but their relative inefficiency is, why we shoot so many threes right now. What made Vogel's defense truly special, though, was its adaptability. He didn't just implement one system and stick to it. When Hibbert was on the court, the defense was built around rim protection. But when he subbed in someone like David West, Vogel would adjust, implementing more aggressive trapping and blitzing in pick and rolls to take advantage of West's mobility. This is from the mind of someone who could be a championship coach one day, and this flexibility kept opponents confused and showed Vogel's tactical intelligence. But enough about the X's and O's. What were the actual real-world results of Vogel's leadership? I will say that even to this day, it does feel incredibly underrated. While they weren't ready in 2012 for serious contention, they did gain valuable experience against the LeBron Heat dynasty as the third seed before ultimately losing in the second round. For 2013, they would be more ready after securing the third seed again, along with their league's best defense. Led by Paul George's emergence as an elite two-way player, the Pacers became the team nobody wanted to face. In the 2013 playoffs, they would make the Eastern Conference Finals after good solid series wins in the first two rounds. And it would be here that they would try and get revenge on LeBron James's Heat super team, who were now the defending champions, and of course had defeated them in the previous season. Not only did the Heat win on a final buzzer beater in Game 1, Vogel made a risky substitution, leaving Hibbert on the bench. This was a learning situation for the coach. He acknowledged that next time he would probably have him in, but also said, "Two great teams just throwing punch for punch. Our spirit is very high, very confident. We know we can play with this basketball team." And they could. No team would win back-to-back games in this series, and Vogel would push LeBron James's mighty Miami Heat to 7 games before ultimately losing to the would-be back-to-back champions. And again, no shame in losing to some GOATs. In the 2013-2014 season, Vogel would have his team even more motivated, taking them to the first seed in the Eastern Conference along with the best defense in the league. Again. And with this, they would make it back to the Eastern Conference Finals and now push Miami to the brink once more, but ultimately this time would lose in 6 games. This still established them as legitimate contenders despite lacking the star power of their opponents, and showed what good coaching can do in this era of super teams, something that the Popovich Spurs were doing as well. It may be a players' league, but it's these moments that show the value of a coach and his ability to, coach. Frank's Pacers teams were known for their physical bruising style. They embraced a defensive identity, often winning low-scoring games with the final score hovered in the 80s or 90s, and you'd know this just by looking at their 20th offensive rating. Really, it was the end of an era, and it wasn't glamorous basketball, but it was effective basketball. Vogel had figured out how to maximize the talents of his roster, turning good players into a great team. But what other talents did he have that would keep him as a head coach in the NBA, and perhaps justify a long-duration contract? While behind the scenes, Vogel's player development skills were equally impressive due to his years of being a scout and assistant coach. His hands-on approach to development combined with his positive coaching style earned him the trust and respect of his players. He wasn't a yeller or disciplinarian. He was a teacher who genuinely believed in his players' abilities, although that being said, yelling would be something he'd try in the future, but we'll get to that a little bit later. This connection allowed him to push his team to levels of defensive excellence that really I don't think anybody expected when he first took over. Now, Paul George would miss basically an entire season with a broken leg, but Vogel would retool and bring the Pacers right back to the playoffs in 2016, albeit with a less dominating squad. And because he was now known as a defensive savant, the Pacers' success under Vogel seemed to indicate a long-term partnership was brewing. But NBA coaching is nothing if not unpredictable, obviously, and despite his impressive record and back-to-back conference finals appearances as well as many playoff wins, his tenure with the Indiana Pacers came to an abrupt end in 2016.
I just came to the conclusion that I felt that it was necessary for these guys to hear a new voice, and Frank's not getting fired, his contract's up, and I'm just made a decision not to renew it.
The decision was a little bit shocking considering he had compiled a 250-win, 181-loss record with the team and had transformed them from a very mediocre team into a legitimate contender in the Eastern Conference, with the absolute best defense and almost prevented the Heat super team dynasty. But Bird, ever the competitor, famously believed that players tuned out coaches after 3 years and that fresh leadership was needed to push the team to the next level. An odd belief, but it makes sense when you consider Pat Riley's Lakers embarrassed the Celtics in the 80s with 5 championships, all with one coach who was there for 10 years. Jackson got another 5 for the Lakers over another 10-year period, and Popovich had 5 titles after coaching for almost 20 years at that point. And yes, I'm going to take that opportunity to roast the Celtics, much like you can take the opportunity to consider subscribing to the GOAT Authority. Now, Vogel's next stop would be the Orlando Magic. He had great success in Indiana, other teams were like, hey, this guy's pretty good, let's hire him. But here he would face a completely different challenge. Unlike his talented Pacers squads, the Magic were in rebuild mode, lacking established stars or any sort of identity. Though Vogel attempted to implement his defensive systems in Orlando, the personnel simply wasn't there to execute it effectively. And due to the rise of the Warriors, Curry, and more three-point shots in a season than players had money in the 70s, he stated that, "I have to rethink everything I've ever thought and taught about defense because of the new style of play in the NBA." Sadly, this only proved that Frank was a championship-ready coach who needed a team of players ready to come together and win, and was not really set up for a young developing team. At least that's what owners thought, and it was wrong. They just didn't give him the time.
But I really am compelled by both types of situations. The long term, I should say, the ability to work with a young core and teach the game to those guys, and to really build them up into a powerhouse. The way we did in Indiana, that's almost equally compelling to me as taking over a team that has a chance to win it all.
And so, after 2 disappointing seasons with Orlando, posting 54 wins and 110 losses, Vogel was once more again looking for work. To many now, his coaching trajectory seemed to be trending downward. The defensive mastermind, who had gone toe-to-toe with the Heat, was now viewed as damaged goods. A coach whose system perhaps couldn't adapt to the modern, offensive-focused NBA, and in this case, the firing made sense. It just wasn't a good fit. Whereas with the Pacers, it really didn't make sense. So at this stage, regular season success provides no guarantee of job security, and reputations can get transformed rapidly based on circumstances often beyond a coach's control. Would this now allow Vogel to get another opportunity to prove his defensive approach could still work at the highest level on the quest for a title, and in doing so, perhaps gaining the job security and longevity of other championship coaches? Vogel's defensive adaptability would soon be tested beyond anything he could have imagined with the Pacers. After being fired by the Magic, he was about to enter the highest pressure coaching job in basketball. The Lakers' 2019 coaching search was nothing short of chaotic. After firing their coach after the first year with the massive signing of LeBron James and almost a decade of terrible results, the organization initially targeted Tyronn Lue, who had championship experience with LeBron James in Cleveland. But when contract negotiations fell apart over the length of the deal and the staff composition, Lue walked away. The Lakers, desperate and directionless, pivoted to Vogel, their backup plan. To add to the awkwardness, they insisted on bringing in Jason Kidd as an assistant, and it was known to everybody, even Vogel, that he was not their first choice. Imagine stepping into a job where the team's superstar and best player in the NBA had a history with another coach, the front office preferred somebody else, and you'd just been fired from your previous position after losing a lot. This was the reality Vogel faced in Los Angeles, a franchise 6 years removed from their last playoff appearance, yet carrying championship or bust expectations thanks to the presence of LeBron James and the newly acquired Anthony Davis. Lesser coaches might have crumbled under this pressure, but not Vogel. Instead, he did what he had always done, focused on defense and adapted his system to the personnel at hand. The Lakers roster was good but imperfect. It had two superstars and a collection of veterans who, with the right guidance, could form an elite defensive unit. So much so that Vogel thought it was the most talented defensive roster he had ever coached. And it had been a few good years since his dominating Pacers defenses and the league had changed. However, his new system here transformed the Lakers almost overnight. By the end of the 2019-2020 regular season, they boasted the NBA's third best defensive rating. Now yes, having Anthony Davis is a bit of a cheat code, but at the same time he used his versatility as a rim protector and perimeter defender. He used LeBron's basketball IQ in help defensive situations, and he used Danny Green and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope strategically against opposing scorers. And along with those two role players' three-point shooting skills, the team was incredibly well-rounded. Vogel had answered the critics on whether he could adjust his defensive strategies to the modern game. However, as the Lakers were about to hit their stride with a dominant win over the championship favorites Milwaukee Bucks led by Giannis MVP, the season was paused due to the pandemic. But when play resumed in July, it happened in the bubble at Disney World in Florida. Teams were isolated from the outside world, playing in empty arenas far from home, with players separated from families for months. The bubble presented these unique psychological hurdles. Maintaining focus in these circumstances required exceptional leadership, which Vogel provided. He kept his team locked in on their championship goal while still respecting the human element of the situation. And LeBron, who had seen it all at that point in his 17-year career, cannot believe we're on 22 and he's still going, recognized Vogel's impact. He's been great. He's been unbelievable. I mean, it's been a crazy obstacle course for our franchise this whole year. He's been able to manage it the whole time, bringing in guys, losing guys. He's just always been the anchor, and our coaching staff has been right behind him. It was time for the playoffs, and Vogel's tactical brilliance was about to shine. Against Damian Lillard and the Trailblazers in the first round, he instructed his guards to apply aggressive ball pressure while having his big men trap on the screens. This destroyed their powerful offense. When they faced the small ball Rockets by D'Antoni, he countered by downsizing his roster, playing Davis at center for extended minutes to neutralize Houston's spacing, and basically invited Russell Westbrook to shoot due to his inefficiency. Each series would bring new challenges, and Vogel would respond with precise adjustments, what good coaches do in playoffs when they won championships. He understood that playoff basketball required this constant evolution, and now instead of being defeated by LeBron James, he had LeBron James. He knew the same defensive scheme doesn't work against every opponent, and when you almost beat prime LeBron James in Miami, you are probably good at that. When LeBron James praised him, it validated what everybody else was seeing. Vogel wasn't just implementing schemes and strategies. He was connecting with his players, earning their trust in the most unusual championship run in history, and where some of the most pure basketball was played. They would use this to defeat the Denver Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals after some Anthony Davis heroics, and head to the finals to face the Miami Heat. While the series was somewhat interesting, there wasn't any doubt the Lakers were the better team, and when they defeated the Heat in 6 games to win the 2020 title, it represented more than just the franchise's 17th. For Vogel, it was his first, and it was proof that his promotion almost 10 years ago was 100% the correct decision. Larry Bird just didn't want to see it through. The backup coach had delivered in the most high-pressure environment imaginable. In a league dominated by offense, his defensive philosophies, the ones that made his career possible with the Pacers so many years earlier, had once more shown his coaching talent, 2 years after being fired by a poverty franchise. And as the Lakers celebrated in the bubble, no one could have predicted that Vogel's job security would evaporate almost as quickly as it had been established. The championship brought him goodwill, but in the modern NBA, that currency doesn't last very long anymore. The organizational challenges that would follow, the roster overhauls, the injuries, and the growing front office interference would test whether even a championship-proven coach could survive when things turned bad. Would this even remarkable achievement be enough to secure his future and build something special, like many Laker coaches before him? Well, that Lakers championship glow faded faster than anybody could have imagined. While Vogel's defensive masterclass had delivered this title, the front office was about to hand him an unsolvable puzzle. How do you maintain an elite defense when your roster is specifically constructed to prevent it? Well, the 2020-2021 season began with promise. Despite the shortest offseason in NBA history due to the COVID-delayed championship run, the Lakers were able to maintain their defensive identity. Vogel's third-ranked defense from the previous season had become the best in the league, and by February they sat at a 21-win, 6-loss record, looking every bit like a team ready to defend their title. But basketball success depends on health as much as strategy. LeBron James and Anthony Davis both suffered significant injuries that derailed the Lakers' championship hopes. Davis missed 36 games, and when the playoffs arrived, he couldn't stay healthy. The Phoenix Suns eliminated the Lakers in the first round, and the Lakers were leading that series 2-1 and without a doubt were the better team with everyone healthy. But sadly, they would lose the series 4-2 after Davis got injured in Game 4. But he had just won a title, so the front office remained patient. The core defensive principles that had led them to the ring under Vogel were still in place, but only for a short while. Then came the decision that would ultimately doom this strategy. In the 2021 offseason, the front office, led by current hero Rob Pelinka, who was a villain back then, as well as owner Jeannie Buss, engineered a blockbuster trade for Russell Westbrook. On paper, adding a former MVP seemed logical, another star to complement LeBron and Davis. In reality, it destroyed Vogel's defensive identity that he had built with the team along with their efficient offense. Gone were Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kyle Kuzma, key rotational players. In their place came Westbrook, an inconsistent defender whose inefficient offense required the ball in his hand. The roster was further filled out with aging veterans on minimum contracts due to the size of his salary, and many of those veterans could not keep up defensively at all. Suddenly, Vogel's schemes that had produced the league's third-best defense and a title were impossible to actually use. The numbers reveal the decline. From a defensive rating of 106.3 2 years ago, they would be 21st in the league, surrendering 113.3 points per 100 possessions. This was a defensive decline worthy of the Roman Empire, and the Westbrook experiment created an impossible situation for Vogel. Reports from The Athletic highlighted a growing disconnect between the coach and the star. Vogel was trying to find the best way to use Westbrook on the team, and the front office were basically telling Vogel to make the experiment work. So basically, they all expected him to somehow integrate a non-shooting, high-usage guard into a system that previously thrived on spacing and defensive versatility. Now, this isn't necessarily Westbrook's fault as he was on the back end of his career, but it made things difficult when his contract took up the slots of about 14 players, and every night became a tactical nightmare for Vogel. The Lakers' spacing was gone, teams would ignore Westbrook on the perimeter, and what they would do is stuff the paint against LeBron and Anthony Davis, and then even the Lakers' crowd would groan when he was about to shoot a three.
What about it? Crowd kind of telling him no, and he missed it.
Defensively, Westbrook would gamble for steals and exert inconsistent effort, and this would ruin the disciplined system that Frank Vogel had. He really wanted this to work. He would bring Westbrook off the bench, he would stagger his minutes with LeBron, and he would even bench Russell Westbrook during crucial moments. But nothing seemed to work, and there's a reason for that. If this roster mismatch wasn't challenging enough, injuries would deal another devastating blow in this particular season. The Lakers became the NBA's only team in 21-22 without a single five-man lineup that played 100 minutes together. It was made worse because LeBron was injured for significant time, so was Anthony Davis playing just 40 games. So this constant lineup shuffling made it nearly impossible for Frank Vogel to implement any consistent defensive principles anyway. And this would make things more difficult with Westbrook as well because he would never have a consistently defined role. Players who thrived in specific roles during the championship run, though, were now forced into different responsibilities or just weren't on the team. Despite these overwhelming challenges, though, Vogel continued to search for solutions. He experimented with zone defenses to hide the weaker defenders, he tried various small ball lineups when Davis was unavailable, and he consistently adjusted his schemes to figure out something that could work. But even if the team was all healthy, the foundation had been pulled out from under him, and he was essentially trying to build a defensive fortress on quicksand. The team's struggles, however, were increasingly pinned on Vogel rather than the roster construction decisions that had undermined his entire system.
Whoever put these old-ass geezers together, they deserve the lion's share. They've scapegoated Frank all year.
Only team in the league with an average age over 30.
He had all the right pieces that were about to go back to the finals again before injuries, and now he just didn't have them. Even when asked about Vogel's future, LeBron said, I respect Frank as a coach and as a man. At the end of the day, I don't know what's going to happen with Frank and him being here, but I have nothing but respect for him. The front office will do whatever it takes to help this ball club become a better ball club, from top to bottom. Well, if that message wasn't clear to you, it's basically saying that someone's got to take the fall for the disappointment of the season, and it wouldn't be the superstar players and it wouldn't be the executives who constructed the roster. Now, this occurrence isn't necessarily a new thing. It's important to consider in history at this moment in the 90s, the Houston Rockets only promoted Rudy Tomjanovich in 92 because the owner said, "We need a change and you can't fire the players." In that case, it was a talented group that would win back-to-back championships under Rudy T, a future Hall of Fame coach. In this case, it was never a championship-winning roster, and that's the big difference. However, as losses mounted and the Lakers fell further and further from making the playoffs, Vogel's firing became almost guaranteed. The defensive genius who had delivered a championship just 18 months ago was now viewed as the problem rather than part of the solution. The final slap from this came when reports of Vogel's dismissal leaked before it was official. He had to learn his fate through media reports rather than from team management. And on April 11, 2022, the Lakers missed the playoffs entirely, finished with a 33-49 win record. The following day, Frank Vogel was officially fired. He had gone from title winner to scapegoat. He had won for them, and for this, he was fired. Fired for doing the same things that had brought the Pacers close to the NBA Finals, and had won the Lakers their first championship in a decade. Imagine if every dynasty had fired their coach in these moments. The blame had been shifted by the Lakers and the players away from whoever was guilty. The message to coaches in the league at this stage was crystal clear. Championships buy you months and not years of job security. Would this begin a troubling trend of poor roster construction and displeased stars having more power than a talented coach?
What do you make of kind of the climate nowadays where the leash seems really short on NBA coaches?
Yeah, it's I don't know what can be done about it, but I really hope that something is done about it. Because it's difficult on the coaching profession. The continuity of having a program and a culture. I just think there's extraordinary value in that. And the roster will change from year to year. But if you got a system and a leadership group that has had success, I think there's extraordinary value in keeping that leadership group together as the roster changes from year to year.
And what would be next for Vogel after he had honestly not done much wrong other than attempt to find a way to win with the Lakers roster he was given? If you thought only having 2 seasons after winning a title was bad, the Phoenix Suns were about to rewrite the coaching survival guide altogether. Vogel was signed to a 5-year, $31 million contract in June 2023, and Frank stepped into what seemed like the perfect opportunity, nothing like Orlando. This was a ready-made contender built around 3 offensive superstars in Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. Phoenix ownership, led by Matt Ishbia, had spent lavishly to assemble a roster designed to compete immediately and without hesitation. The championship window was open, but the clock was already ticking. And so from day one, Vogel faced the monumental task of bringing together 3 high-usage superstars into a cohesive offensive system while still simultaneously implementing his championship-level defense. But here was the problem. These were not complementary pieces. There were 3 alpha players accustomed to having the ball in their hands, and Durant in particular reportedly felt uncomfortable with his role in this offense, and naturally this creates tension between the leading superstar and the coach. Well, the Suns managed a respectable 49-33 record, good enough for 6th in the hyper-competitive Western Conference. But the team lacked a clear identity, going from stretches of brilliance to stretches of not brilliance. But it was a Frank Vogel team, right? Their defensive rating must have been good. No, it dropped down to 13th in the league. And the roster had issues beyond Vogel's control again. The lack of a true point guard like Chris Paul, who was, traded away. They didn't have a lockdown perimeter defender, which left them weaker against elite teams. And these deficiencies were magnified in their first-round playoff matchup against the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team built to exploit exactly these problems. The Timberwolves' size and physicality overwhelmed the Suns, with Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns dominating the rebounding battle. We use the term battle there respectfully. It was more of a slaughter. Along with that, the Minnesota defense disrupted Phoenix's offensive playmaking, and they lost 4-0. Swept in a humiliating way. Now, for most coaches, again, especially those with championship pedigrees, Such an outcome might warrant a second chance at least, time to build something, correct some issues with the team, the roster, the strategies. It takes time to build that chemistry, but at Phoenix, things were not this way. The excessive luxury tax bill for the roster, that wasn't even good, was about $116 million. This created the pressure to win right now, and every season without a championship was simply a failure. Sounds like an owner problem. But on May 9th, 2024, just days after the playoff elimination, the Suns fired Vogel. 82 regular season games and 4 playoff games later.
This Vogel thing's a tough one to defend. It just is. Because Vogel's a good coach. And I just don't know how you go from winning a title to being the problem in 2 different cities in the span of 4 years.
The 5-year contract that was supposed to provide stability became an expensive fine for the Suns and a free paycheck for Vogel, with Phoenix now obligated to pay him $31 million to not coach their team. The organization's explanation was interesting. They stated that they needed a different head coach following a thorough review of the season. There was no acknowledgement once more of the roster construction issues or the lack of defensive players, and in the modern NBA, it seems that coaches were becoming the most convenient scapegoats. Not that they hadn't been in the past, but things were different now. They were easier to replace than max contract stars. What makes Vogel's situation so extraordinary is that he just wasn't any coach being scapegoated. He had won a title and won a title recently. If someone with his credentials couldn't even get a second season, what hope did other coaches have? There were rumors of him being so distraught and upset with the team's energy and effort that he was yelling. They would end up rolling their eyeballs at him and not really taking him seriously. Obviously, this means there is a disconnection between the coach and the locker room, but at the same time, are you a serious player if you're not going to listen to a championship coach who was able to gain the respect of LeBron James? This whole firing saga for Vogel goes beyond him. Consider Mike Budenholzer, fired by Milwaukee just 2 years after delivering their first championship in 50 years. Or Tyronn Lue, removed from Cleveland less than 2 full seasons after leading them to their only ever title. Even Nick Nurse couldn't make it more than 4 years in Toronto after their historic 2019 championship, but that makes a bit more sense because he had multiple seasons afterwards to rebuild. Most recently, with only days before the start of the playoffs, Mike Malone of the Denver Nuggets has also been fired not even 2 years after winning the franchise its first ever title. Only Nurse has been given the time after his title to try and turn things around again. And this is because NBA coaching tenures have plummeted from an average of 4.3 years in the 1990s to just 2.1 years today. The only other 3 coaches since 2012 to win a title? Steve Kerr, Eric Spoelstra, and Greg Popovich. All 3 are still leading their franchises, and all 3 have multiple titles, with Spoelstra even returning to the finals against Vogel in 2020. Everybody always says you've got to try be the Spurs. You've got to be like the Spurs, former Knicks coach Van Gundy said, who is also a student of Pat Riley. But then they don't want to do what the Spurs do, which is stay with the same coach. The modern NBA has evolved into a star-driven league where coaches are increasingly viewed as interchangeable rather than the culture setters and strategy creators they actually are. And the story of Frank Vogel and the other championship coaches that have now been fired shows that they are not above this, and the fact that all of their salaries are considered meaningless to billionaire owners who don't really care about the rounding error if a coach doesn't succeed immediately. How then can NBA coaches be expected to create championship-winning formulas, dynasties, and become GOATs? Steve Kerr, despite his championships, acknowledged this reality of coaching positions. We're all going to suffer a familiar fate at some point. That's kind of the way it is. When even the league's most successful current coach approaches their careers with such negativity, something has changed, and not for the better. Would it be more effective to build rosters that complement coaching strengths rather than expecting coaches to maximize poorly constructed teams? Ultimately, Frank Vogel has answered this by winning a championship and being fired for it. As Jeff Van Gundy also says, it's a players' league when you win, it's a coach's league when you lose. They're supposed to have some magical powers that can completely wipe away weaknesses of a roster or an individual player. And honestly, he would know, for he had the most violent rivalry of all time against Pat Riley. Click to see what happens when coaches are trusted to go to war.